Okay, awesome. Well, I will get this started at we'll start at 1 exactly, but I want to thank everyone who's in the room already for joining us, and really looking forward to an exciting presentation today. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this. If you've had a chance to read the book, then obviously you already know you're in for a treat. And if not, then this is going to be a great chance for you to learn just some incredible insights, to hear some fascinating stories, to get a little bit smarter. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how much else I can say really in that regard. So yeah, we'll start at maybe 101, just to give people a little bit of time to join, and I'll introduce Melina then, and we'll get things started. I'm very tempted to play some lobby music, but I won't do that yet, just because, the sound transfer isn't exact. But maybe in the interim, since everyone here so far are kind of the early birds, maybe you can send some messages in chat so that people can start to see where you're joining us from, and maybe what some things you're hoping to learn today are most excited about.
Love it. I was just starting to type into the chat box. I was going to do the like, hey, where's everybody joining from? So same wavelength.
Cool. So let's see where everyone is coming in from. All right, Susie, coming from Bath. Very cool. Canada in the house. Awesome. Whoa.
Montana, Vancouver.
This is very cool. A new Zoom plugin I think they need to develop, if you don't have one yet, is a virtual map. So as people enter these, we can sort of see these little pins appearing. That would be really cool.
I agree. That'd be a lot of fun.
All right, we got some New Jersey, Washington State,
That's me.
Pittsburgh. Yeah. And I can give a shout out to my fellow Yinzers or Pittsburghers here. So.
Oh,
Oh my God.
Finland.
Whoa. Well, it's in Dallas, great place, fantastic food, fantastic people. We're at 101, so I think we can go ahead and get started. So, Melina, I will briefly introduce you to Melina, and then I will allow her to really, I'm just teeing up, but the real hitter's stepping up shortly. So, just to give you a little bit of background on Melina Palmer. So she's the founder and CEO of the Brainy Business. And what the Brainy Business does is provide behavioral economics consulting to businesses of all sizes from around the world, much like all of you around the world. If you haven't heard it yet, definitely got to give a listen to her podcast, The Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. So it has downloads in over 170 countries. It's used as a resource for teaching applied behavioral economics for universities and businesses all over the world as well. So a little bit of background on Melina, and of course she'll be able to maybe tell her own story a little bit as that sort of threads into today's discussion. She obtained her bachelor's degree in business administration and marketing, worked in corporate marketing and brand strategy for over a decade before then deciding to get her master's in behavioral economics. She's a member of a lot of associations like the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists, and she has research that's been published in the Association for Consumer Research, the Finley Research Institute. She writes in a ton of fascinating journals, including Inc. And this book that you're going to be discussing today and some of the lessons from, I'll let her share the story there. So without further ado, I'll give a physical drum roll here. Melina Palmer, everybody.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I am going to get this going, and we can see with my slides, and I'm supposed to see now you get to see the little trick here as I make myself a small when I updated that, it should have been something different. So hi, everybody. That's fun. Now I can be here Good stuff. All right. So thank you again for that great introduction. I am Melina Palmer, and today we're going to be talking about what your customer wants and can't tell you, which is the name of my book. And we'll talk a little bit about behavioral economics and what it is and why it matters for everyone in business. And of course, we're leaving time for Q&A. I also always like to use our chat box to help have some engagement as we go. So be ready for that as we are going through the presentation. So when we talk about behavioral economics, for anyone who's not familiar, I like to say that this is if traditional economics and psychology had this adorable baby, we would have behavioral economics. And the reason that the field came about is because traditional economics had a problem in that it assumes rational people making logical choices in everything that they're doing. And because we are all human, we know that's not really the world that we live in. People tend to, like, you should diet and exercise, but then it feels better to watch Netflix than eat a big bag of Cheetos on the couch instead. And you think about doing something tomorrow. Your customers do the same things. We have problems at work where we want to do something and then don't. And when you have these inaccurate assumptions, it makes it so that the models predicting behavior are not accurate. So over time, you had economists and psychologists and people from neuromarketing really entering into one another's fields or working together on projects to try and see if there were these common threads within the brain that people could use to better predict behavior. And the good news is that is why behavioral economics was born. They were successful. So why does this matter for you in whatever your business or industry happens to be? Well, the first piece being, it is definitely a field on the rise. So if you haven't heard about it yet, you will be hearing about it more beyond just today. And back at the end of 2019, before the whole world shifted, Bloomberg had announced their top jobs of the next decade, and behavioral scientist was #1 on the list. So you have companies around the world who either are having departments dedicated to the behavioral sciences already, or are working with consultancies like mine or others to be really integrating how the brain really works into the ways they're developing their products and their services and making sure that they're able to better communicate. The good thing is it doesn't have to be anything crazy that we're putting in for these sorts of tests and things. So one of the things early on that Netflix found was that the image they used when they were promoting shows could increase the likelihood that someone would watch by as much as 20 or even 30%. So here on the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, you can see all the images are fairly similar. You have that same font, the bright colors, the same characters, but the way that they tested, just simple A/B, they were able to find that one resonated better than the other. And they were able to, that was done through their behavioral science wing of being able to see what was going to work more. Before that, everybody just sort of accepted the art that came from the production companies. And then Netflix was able to find they could increase the likelihood people will watch a show and that they'll stay within Netflix, which is, of course, very important for their model. Another thing that you've definitely seen, and probably a lot more here during the pandemic, is this buy now button with Amazon. And so reducing the friction that people experience, or we also call it sludge within the space, to make it easier to do business with you is really important because our brains get distracted very easily. So you've seen the buy now button, but you might not know that back in 1999, Amazon actually put a patent on that one-click buying. So all their competitors, including Barnes and Noble, would have to have a second, are you sure sort of a question, or make you have an additional click in the process. And if you think, one click's not that important, what's the point? Way back then, Steve Jobs paid Amazon $1 million to be able to have one-click buying in iTunes. So to remove a single click, paid $1 million to Amazon. If you think about your processes and how many times you say it's just one more click, one more box to fill out, one more person to call, one more page on the website, one more form, just one more thing we're asking people to do. What if each of those was worth $1 million? What if you were losing and aware of who's, dropping out of the process? If you can reduce that friction, it can make it much easier for people to do business with you, and understanding those brain science pieces, some of which we'll talk about today, can help bring light to that. So we're first going to talk about how the brain works. And even though we all have brains, we aren't really aware of what they're doing. You can think, though, of your brain like a person riding an elephant. So the person that's the rider is your logical, conscious brain, which we all like to think is the bulk of what we have going on at any given time. And then you have this subconscious elephant. So the rider has a plan. It understands the logic. It knows where it's going. It can see out on the horizon where we're at, the best way to get there. But because it doesn't speak the same language as the elephant, you can't logic it into going where you want it to go. You can't push it or pull it. If you're not properly motivating that elephant, it's got, 6 tons of weight behind it, that if it wants to stop or run off in a different direction, the rider is really at the mercy of the elephant and where it wants to go. So for the conscious to have a way to motivate the elephant and make a clear path as simple as possible is what we're trying to do. So when we think about our brains, like I said, we've got this cognitive, conscious side, which is anytime you can think about thinking, you're aware of the act of thinking, that's in that conscious, cognitive space. And so we're getting ready for a chat box moment here. And I know that potentially some of you have read the book, so we might lose some of the reveal here. But what percentage of the brain's processing do you think is subconscious? We say 25, 50, 75%. Anything else? Okay, see we're coming in here. 75, 70, lots of 75s. I saw a couple 95s in there because it is fair to put different guesses. I see a 50, 87. So the highest I've seen anyone report on this puts it at 99.999%. Yikes. That would mean only 0.001 being done on a conscious level for all those lazy brains that didn't want to do the math there. And the lowest studies really put this at 95%. Even if it was only, say, 80%, it's a huge amount of what is happening in your customer's brain at any given time. And because the logical conscious and the subconscious don't speak the same language, they don't communicate to one another, it's important to be focusing on what's motivating that elephant instead of focusing on this teeny tiny percentage of what's happening with the conscious brain and hoping someone's getting to logic. We want to be working on what's going to be easiest for the subconscious. So a little bit about how this works. It's not left brain, right brain. And while within behavioral economics, you may see people talk about this as system 1 and system 2, which was made famous by Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman. While we talk about them as 2 different systems, it's not that like one is on and the other is off. And when system 1 is going, system 2 is not. I like to think of it more like a gatekeeper or a receptionist when you're trying to get a meeting with a busy executive. So the subconscious is that gatekeeper. It's scanning the world around because it's faster. It's able to process things. It has rules and knows how things should go. So it can say, I know how to do this. I know how to handle that. I can do this. I have a rule for that. Normal, 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 normal. And then every so often we'll have a flag and say, I'm not really sure what to do with this. Or this is something really important, conscious brain, it's time for you to step up and do something. If you think about when you learned to drive a car, it was very tedious, slow, difficult to do. You're thinking very actively about where your hands are, where the mirrors are, where you're looking, what pedal does what. It's very difficult. The last time you drove a car, it was likely really easy. We've all experienced that drive home and you get home late at night and say, man, I don't even remember driving. I don't even know how I got here. And that is because your subconscious brain has taken over and it has rules. It knows how to do all these things, and you don't have to consciously think about them. And so that subconscious is able to just process and you don't have to think about it. In contrast, though, if you were, say, driving across a mountain overpass in the pouring rain and you're between a semi truck and a guardrail, you can kind of feel everything slow down and you're very focused on what's happening. You can feel every tiny movement of the steering wheel between your fingers and under your hands. And it's very slow and focused. That's a kind of a literal handoff to the conscious brain from the subconscious, because it's the most important thing for you to be doing at that time. So when we talk and think about our brains, we often like to make a comparison of a computer. And if you were to think about it that way, in the terms of like a bits per second, the subconscious can do about 11 million. So that elephant has a lot that it's able to do. Like I said, it's very fast and it uses rules to make decisions on that quick basis. Now compare this to the conscious brain, which can only do about 40. And that's not 40,000, which would still be a bad percentage, but really just 40 bits of very little that it's able to do every second compared to those 11 million. So again, we want to be communicating, thinking about those rules. I'm not going to talk about all of them. There are well over 100 that are happening at any given time within the brain. Many of these already have episodes on the Brainy Business podcast. Throughout the presentation, if anything does, it might have a note with an episode number. 16 of these concepts are in the book, and today we're going to talk about a few. So I'm not going to bring that up necessarily again, but wanted you to know in case you're taking notes as we go. So when you think about applying behavioral economics within your business, I've come up with this, analogy of behavioral baking. So if you were going to start a bakery, you've decided like this is your new lot in life, you're really excited, but unfortunately, you've never actually baked anything before. The first thing you probably would want to do is understand the ingredients, what they do, so that you have some idea of how they might go together. Eggs, sugar, butter, and flour can be combined in all sorts of ways, and you can use them to make cupcakes or brownies or macarons or pizza dough, right? All sorts of things. So you need to know what they do so you don't end up with a cake that has 3 cups of sugar and only a few tablespoons of flour. But you also need a plan going in for what you're going to make. If you just throw everything into a bowl and, hope it's going to come out good on the other side, you're probably going to end up with a big, gross mess, even if you have the right ingredients in the bowl. So you want to know what you're going to make, what those ingredients do. And even then, you'll probably start with a recipe or a box cake mix, even super simple recipe where there's just a few things. And if you come through the process and your cake is a bit maybe dense or soupy, doesn't rise properly, you're not going to say, I tried baking once and that didn't work. Baking's not real. That makes no sense. You're just going to learn from that as you go through and experiment and as you try new things. And eventually you can sprinkle in other ingredients and spices and things as you get more comfortable, but it's all a testing process as you are learning to bake new and different things. It's the same with applying behavioral economics. The concepts I talk about as those ingredients, and we're going to talk about a few today. There are some recipes within my book. We're going to follow one of those today as we look at this kind of behavioral baking approach and just a way to think about combining things together. So this is a recipe and we can't get to all of these today, but again, this is really that flow through part 3 of my book. So we're going to start by talking about what problem you're solving. You need to know what's important for people to do, the behavior you're wanting to change, what's keeping people from doing that. Once you know your best choice, how do you showcase it? How can you nudge people and keep them on that path, make it easy, and then starting to test. So first, what problem are you solving? And there's a reason this is first. This is the biggest problem I see companies make, either my clients or those that reach out to me or that I interviewed, work for the podcast or the book. is not understanding the problem at hand. We have all really been ingrained with this idea of finding answers as quickly as possible. And whatever question or problem pops into our head at first must be the right one. But really, if you're looking at the wrong question and it's really easy to come up with the right answer to the wrong question, you end up just wasting lots of time and resources. It's a really bad approach. If you can take a little more time thinking about the problem, you will very much be able to advance beyond your competition. I love the quote from Einstein. He was reportedly asked if he only had an hour to save the world, how would he spend it? To which he replied that he would take 55 of those minutes to understand the problem and 5 minutes solving it. Einstein's a pretty smart guy. If he was going to dedicate 55 minutes of his 60 to understanding the problem before jumping in to solve, I really want you to think about your ratio. On a past project that you've worked on, of your respective 60 minutes, how much time did you spend thinking about the problem before jumping into solution mode? And that doesn't mean 60 minutes total. We had 1 hour, we talked about the problem, we jumped in. But if you spent hundreds of hours on a project and one 60-minute meeting thinking about the problem before you jumped in, that's not really the best ratio. So you maybe didn't even spend 5 minutes of it. So when you think about and focus on the right problem, again, sets you off to be solving the right things for your customers and the business. I work with teams on a process called question storming, which is based on the Right Question Institute's question formulation technique. And it's one of my very, very favorite things to do, this process of making sure we're working on the right question. This is something I do with my consulting. An example I like to talk about is the littery. And if you were to think, if I was to tell you your next job, you have to make sure everyone properly throws away and sorts their garbage every single time around the entire world. And until you have fixed this, you can't do anything else in your business. You feel like you're kind of doomed. This is what you're going to be doing for the rest of time, and generations after you are going to be doing this as well. Yeah. And it feels like, we'd say change is hard. People don't know what they're supposed to do. We need to just educate them, right? We would jump into the logic of making sure they understand the problem, tell them about Garbage Island and how big it is, and show pictures of turtles with straws in their noses, or, ducks with the can plastic rings around their necks, whatever, to shock people into making a difference. And then we need to educate them with a brochure or commercials telling them about how to recycle and which things are compostable and whatever that is. But that hasn't worked for a really long time. People have tried that for decades and it's not making a difference. The literary instead thought about the problem differently, understanding behavior of what's happening, and have now turned litter into lottery tickets, which is how we get the littery. Knowing that people are really motivated by chances that they could win something big. And the literary tested in movie theaters, which, if you remember going to a movie theater, it's one of the grossest places. People just leave buckets and sticky stuff and assume someone else is going to be coming back to pick things up later. And they tested in 4 theaters over 30 days in Sweden, and they ended up having 100% compliance when people were told in a very simple video, because there are well over 100 languages spoken in this area. So it had to be very simple, saying, hey, if you throw this away, properly sort, you get entered in to win a lottery. And the prize there was only 5,000 euro, which is a lot, but where they're partnering now with municipalities for things that would be for millions of pounds or dollars or euros, incentivizing people to throw things away. So that 100% compliance, everyone threw everything away, properly sorted, didn't have to ask to get their tickets. They knew what to do. They just needed to be properly motivated to make the choice. So one thing I want to note, and there's more about this case study in the book, and as you can see, an episode of it on the podcast, but when you're thinking about getting your customers to do something, you want to separate from why you're doing it and why you think they should do it, And instead, ask yourself, is it more important that they take the action, even if it's for the wrong reason, or do you only care that they care as much as you do? So if the literary was saying they want people to know why, they're helping the environment and the importance of it, and that's most important first, and then they'll change, people don't change. If you can have this sort of selfish choice about possibly winning something, and that's going to get the bottle put in the recycling, is that more important? Getting that behavior shift is when you sit and think about it, but we often don't take that step. And then you aren't asking the right question. You're not looking to solve the right problem. And that's a reframing piece, both in the way you think about the problem and in the way that you communicate solutions to your customers. So framing is this concept that how you say something or showcase it matters much more than what you're saying. And we're getting to another option for our chat box here. So I want you to imagine you are going to the grocery store to pick up some ground beef. Maybe you're making spaghetti tonight. And there are two almost identical stacks. One is labeled as 90% fat-free, and the one next to it as 10% fat. Now, which one do you want to buy? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Which one do you immediately feel pulled toward? Which one sounds better to you? 90% fat-free or 10% fat? So we have lots and lots of 90%, someone who is possibly on a paleo diet saying they want the 10% fat. But in general, and I've done this presentation for thousands around the world, overwhelmingly, everyone says 90% fat-free. They would rather get that. It sounds better. And logically, I think it might have been Malcolm. It went by kind of fast, but it's the same thing. Like, that they're the same, but you can't, it just feels different in the way that you hear it. And so we have that frame making a difference. So look at your own business. Where might you just be communicating something as 10% fat, and you can tweak it to be 90% fat-free and be that much more appealing? You don't even have to change any of your offerings. You might just be talking about it in the wrong way. Similarly, where is your industry using 10% fat terms, and you can then reframe and be the only person talking 90% fat-free, saying essentially the same thing, but in a way that is so much more compelling for your potential customers. That reframe makes all the difference. And I have an example using jargon, which is something that so many industries do. One of my clients years ago was working on a campaign, a financial institution, for a new rewards checking account they were super excited about. The jargon of banking is often APRs and APYs, percentage rates, things like that. They think it's very common and compelling, and they were really excited about this campaign and just wanted me to help them know if they were using the right messaging. So what they wanted for their headline to launch this new campaign around their checking account was earn 1.26% APY for up to $25,000 in balances. And this was not a joke, what they were planning to put on billboards and all their messaging for the campaign. To which I said, please don't do that, and got them to reframe this as a question that's appealing to the brain. Even people that get numbers and stuff, this doesn't immediately get you excited. You don't really know tangibly what that means. So I had them reframe this as a question saying, did your checking account pay you $315 last year? This is, of course, the calculation of the 1.26 times the 25,000 to be able to get to this. But this is a question you can very easily say, no, they didn't. And who's talking about that? I want to get to that next step. And we'll talk about small steps before we close out, but getting people to make that next choice is the most important thing that you're trying to do, and thinking about small moments. So what this financial institution was able to see was a benefit in a 60% increase in month-over-month account openings when this rolled out. And if they would have had it framed the other way, probably wouldn't have had that same impact. So having a question that is helping them, and they didn't have to add to their media buy, they didn't do anything different, just changing the way they talked about it and framed it for the customer, really making all the difference. So first, you want to know what you want people to do. And that behavior shift is important. And as you think about this, it's also important to remember that we humans are a herding species. So we look to others to help guide us on what we should do, just like sheep and guppies and cows, all sorts of other herding species. And one of the ways to execute on this is something called social proof. These stars and ratings and reviews really do impact the decisions that people are going to make. And thoughtfully introducing herding and social proof can make a really big difference in adoption. It may feel like we don't need to list out what's most popular and put a big arrow or box around it. You think people should know what's best for them. But one study that was done with restaurant menus in China found that when they just labeled those items that truly were most popular as most popular, their likelihood of being chosen increased by 13 to 20%. So if just adding 2 words, most popular, to something that is your most popular product, and hopefully you have aligned as something that's also most profitable, best for your business and best for customers, and you can increase the likelihood that people will choose it by 20%, why would you not? So understanding what you want people to do, what's best for your business, and then being thoughtful about how you apply herding and social proof can really make a difference in adoption. We also want to think a little bit about priming. And this is the second concept that's introduced within my book, because it's thinking about what happens just before a decision is super critical in the way a choice is made. And so if you were to, let's say you're on your way to participate in a study and you happen to bump into someone who's holding a whole bunch of stuff and they drop it all and ask you, "Oh, I'm so sorry, can you hold this for just a moment?" And they hand you either a hot coffee or an iced coffee while they pick up all their stuff. You're a nice person, you hold it, give it back, and then you go your separate ways. You don't realize that person was part of the study that you were participating in. And then you go in and it's one of these, like if you think back to 4th grade, basically, where you had to read a paragraph about someone and then rate their personality, how you would talk about them, things like that. What this study found was those who held the iced coffee were much more likely to rate the person they read about as being cold, distant, and difficult than those who held the hot coffee. Our brains make very literal associations with things, and there are many examples in the book, including this. You had people asked to work together on projects. They were put together in a room. Half of them, there was a briefcase in sight, the others a backpack. No one saw it because it's, subconscious, doesn't really care, but it influenced the decision. And those in the backpack room were more cooperative than those in the briefcase room because of the associations our brains make. Backpacks are when we were in school, we did lots of group projects. Briefcases are for boardrooms and greed and combative behavior. And that translated into the way people acted in those experiences, even though, again, they didn't even notice that they were there. So people that say they aren't influenced by Facebook ads or they don't see them, they're wrong. It's influencing their subconscious, and you can now be looking for ways to make sure it's communicating the right message and knowing that imagery is incredibly powerful when it comes to priming. All the senses are involved. The sense of scent is really impactful as well. Again, lots of examples in the book. So now, once you know something is the best choice, how do you showcase it? We're going to do another test here. And for this, no Googling. You're supposed to not know this. And we've got a couple questions here. So we're armed and ready. Are there more or less than 100,000 penguins in Antarctica? So let's go ahead and put these in the chat box. What do you think? More or less? So we see a more, less, more, some less. All right. So what do we think it is? We've got, so now you have to actually claim something. Give me a number. So we see a 67,000, 0, 25,000, a 2 million, 3.7 million, 159,000, 500,000. All right, we got a couple nuns, which you always think I'm tricking you and that there aren't actually penguins there. I am tricking you, but not in this way. So, oh, Jeff, that's cheating. You don't get to just say millions. You have to pick a number of million, and it is 12. There are approximately 12 million penguins in Antarctica. And I think we can say that there wasn't anything close to that. The highest, I think, was 3.7 or something that someone guessed in there. So let's go ahead. We're going to try one more. We're going to do this again. And I like your emoji, Erica. That's always fun. So let's do again. I'll give you another chance. Are there more or less than 25 million polar bears in the world? Less. Lots of less. I see a more. Erica, Sarah, Wim, and Patty, I'll say less. I saw a way less. You know, sometimes I get kind of a sad face here. So, and we had a guess on a number. So let's go ahead. How many do we think there are? So we had several lesses. 25 million was our number here. So we see a 2 million, 250,000, 50,000, a 10 million, 12 million. See, that's another one too. You always, so people think I'm going to be, it's the same number. And unfortunately it's not. I wish that it was. There were a couple guesses in there that were close. There are only estimated to be 26,500 polar bears left in the world today, which is a really sad thing for sure. But let's now talk a little bit about what the heck just happened. You're all smart people. Maybe you've watched a lot of the, Discovery Channel, even during pandemic, when you've made it to the end of Netflix and felt like you needed something to go check out. But why were your guesses in many cases so far off? So if you remember, when I asked you about penguins, I started with 100,000. And when I asked about polar bears, I started with 25 million. What if I had swapped those? If I had asked you about 25 million penguins, do you think you would have been closer to 12 million? And if I had only asked about 100,000 polar bears, how many of you would have been closer to the 26,000 that actually exist? So I primed you by setting an anchor in the way that I framed the question. So we can see a lot of things, and that was to help nudge the choice that you were going to make. And we'll talk about nudging before we wrap up here. So this concept of anchoring and adjustment is that our brains were very influenced by numbers, and anchoring is more than just numbers, but for our purposes here, we'll talk about it in this way. One of my favorite examples of this is in a grocery store end cap display. They were doing a test and they had two different versions. So in one case, it said Snickers bars by them for your freezer. The other says Snickers bars by 18 for your freezer, which we can all probably agree 18 is a lot of Snickers bars. Even, pandemic hoarding, we probably weren't buying that many. And if you were the person creating this ad, probably would feel really uncomfortable putting 18 out there. That's a herding thing as well. You don't want to be too different. And your logical brain would say, well, I don't want to have to explain this arbitrary number. And, them is unlimited. And people could get 100 Snickers bars if they wanted. And it probably doesn't make that big of a difference anyway. I'll just say them. But because it's listed here, it did make a big difference. And it was actually a 38% increase in sales when the number 18 was used instead of the word them. That's the only thing that was different. And it's because of this concept of anchoring. In the case we were talking, when you logically think about selling to other logical people, you think them could be 100, right? When we're buying and we're not planning on getting Snickers, them is really a fancy word for zero, for that subconscious buying brain. And 18 is going to be something that's a little bit different, hits our brain kind of in a weird way. So with them, maybe we get two. I think, well, we saw the sign, it had some influence, we do something. In 18, you go, 18, I'm way better than everybody else. I don't need 18, I'll just get 6. So that anchor adjusted the way that we think about and buy and how many we get. Another thing that's very subtly happening behind the scenes here is the framing of the question that is hitting the brain kind of behind these statements. So the question for the them scenario is, do you want Snickers bars? Would you like to get some? In the case with number 18, we have a more implied sale. And the question is, how many do you want to buy? That very subtle shift in the frame of the way we think about the messaging impacts the buying behavior. So one additional concept here is that of relativity and how we compare things against each other. We don't have a good set of valuing a one-off item. Like, so for this fish, say, does it have a good life compared to other fish in bowls? When you just see it there, kind of go, I don't know, maybe. Like, it's hard to say. I don't have much context. When we see this fish, we say, oh yeah, things are great in that first bowl. That's where I want to be. That's a much better life over there for that particular fish. We need these reference points to decide what we want. And this context can help really influence the decision. So choices are not fixed or constant. And there are lots and lots and lots of studies to show that people will choose different things based on the information and how it is presented to them. Let's use the example of going to a restaurant. So you are in a new place you haven't been before, and you go to look up a place to go eat. And these are the two options that come up. What studies have found is, given this particular choice is something really difficult for people to make a decision about. The 3-star is closer, the better food is further away in the 5-star. So this is a hard choice to make. I'm going to show you another. We're going to go into the chat box one more time here. So when we include one other option, let's see how this may make it easier to make a choice. So now this is what you are presented with. Which restaurant, and you can just put the number of stars, do you think most people will choose when these are the 3 options? Are they going to go for the 3-star, the 5-star, or the 4-star? And we have an overwhelming response toward the 5 stars, and then a couple that included the 4. And you're right, it's the 5-star. The relativity, the way that these are compared, makes a difference. So how about in this scenario? Which restaurant do you think most people will choose when this 2-star restaurant is shown? We have several 3s, a couple of 5s, and we have another 3, and you're correct. The 3-star, because the 2-star that's a little bit further makes that 3-star look better. Now, it's important to note that if you saw all 4, it's still now a paradox of choice situation. We're not going to really talk about the paradox of choice today, but too many decisions that are spread out in this way makes it impossible. You have this kind of analysis paralysis problem, and just go with what you're familiar with instead of trying something new. So again, you don't want to show every single possible option, but very specific ones. So the last piece in our puzzle here being where you can nudge your potential customers along the way. And the biggest problem here that businesses make is trying to get people from, A to double Z. You're trying to get so many steps in one process. And we need to really think about the small steps, the little micro decisions that are happening throughout this process of buying from you. The average person makes 35,000 decisions every single day. And if you think about those little micro choices of the subconscious, you can be nudging kind of like bumpers when you're going bowling, just keeping someone on the path you want them to be. So let's say you were going to be sending a postcard as part of a very large campaign you're working on. What you might think about in the steps for the postcard is, we send the postcard and people buy or they don't. That's what happens from the postcard. And we put a tracking link on it. We thought about it, or the email or whatever. But there are lots of little moments within that are nudgeable that you should be paying attention to. So do they notice the postcard? You need them to then read it, to flip it over, be interested enough to not throw it away. You need them to visit your website, read your homepage, potentially go to a product page, pricing page, place something in the cart, hit buy, get through that extra click because you don't have that patent like Amazon for the one-click ordering. And there are all these points where you need them to not get distracted by Instagram or a text message or the kids in the background or something else happening. So all those points, if you can be re-nudging and aligning and thinking about the right behavioral economics concepts to integrate, can make a difference. So I mentioned nudgeable moments. I have one last example before we're going to get to the Q&A on here that is of opportunistic insurance fraud, which I'm sure sounds really exciting. But it was a problem that was costing the UK £1 billion per year for the industry. And so opportunistic insurance fraud are those times where, say you're applying for insurance on a car and you know that your 16-year-old son is going to be driving, but you decide to put you as the primary driver instead because you think it's going to save you a little bit of money. Or when you're asked how much your laptop is worth, you say $700 instead of $500. Just a tiny little fib, I guess, to help benefit you. And it may feel like there's no problem there and no one's really getting hurt. But again, it was costing £1 billion a year in the UK, and then making it so everyone's premiums actually go up to accommodate for this. But the industry thought, what can we do? How do we get anybody to change that? It just is sort of a thing that happens. There's nothing we can do about it. But there was a test that was done that looked at 18 different interventions of behavioral economics, including many we've seen here today. They looked at social proof. They had some with priming, the way they were framing, doing anchoring, commitment devices, all sorts of things. One of which was the CAPTCHA. So we've all had to prove we're not a robot before, but do you think much about the word that's here? In this case, they tested with priming, having people type the word honesty. And again, like the backpack or the briefcase, you probably don't even think about it. It doesn't even register as something that happened, but it reduced that opportunistic fraud by about half. Which, if we remember, it's a £1 billion problem. That's hundreds of millions that are saved just from this tiny little nudge at the right time. And what's important to note is that all the things they tested had a positive impact, raising from, 8% lift to this, in the 55% of a shift that they had. So if they would have just tried something that had a 10% benefit, and said, wow, this is amazing. Look at this. We saved, 100 million, yay us, and stopped versus running a test, they wouldn't have known how much better they could have done. And think back to that Snickers example with the 38% increase. It's not as impactful unless you know what you're competing against, what would have happened, having those controls, taking the time to know what you're trying to nudge, that we know the problem we're trying to solve, the interventions we're putting in place, and then seeing how much they helped to increase that behavior that we want. When you think about running your own experiments, and again, there's a lot about this in the book, my summary of examples would be, you want to keep it small. So you don't have to go do this huge undertaking to test behavioral economics. Even back when we look at that Netflix example from the very beginning, they were doing A/B tests of individual images to see where they would have lift. So keeping it small helps you to know what's happening, and you don't try to do everything all at once. So you want to be thoughtful both about what you're testing and what behaviors you're trying to change. Make sure you think about that problem, what you're working on, and then be testing often. You want to be learning regularly. If you remember back to the baking a cake example and running that bakery, you need to be trying more and more to get, a less dense cake. And then next time I'm going to work with the flavors, and then I'm going to try to do a different frosting and make that myself. And even when you get as comfortable with making every single birthday cake, when it comes time to make the wedding cake, you're going to hire a professional to come in and do that because there's a lot on the line. When you're working on that £1 billion problem or something that is hugely important for your business, definitely you want to bring in research partners that are able to have that expertise in the behavioral sciences. Like I said, there are hundreds of concepts in the brain at any given time. How they come together, you want to make sure that you're using the experts at the right points. So just as a quick little summary here, there were several concepts talked about as we went. We talked about framing and that how matters more than what. You can see the note there about which episodes those are. We also had herding and social proof. And so people like you can really influence decisions. There's a question of if the recording is going to be sent. So I'm sure we'll answer that as we wrap up. And I believe the answer is yes, but I'm not sure. Priming and that what happens first matters a lot. Trying big numbers with anchoring and adjustment, knowing we call it a decoy in relativity, but that context matters. And your decoy doesn't mean it's bad. It's just a slightly different version of what you're trying to promote. So I can get into that in the questions if people have questions about it when we get to that. And then also nudging to help people make the best choice. And as you can see, that's a 7-part series on the podcast. Nudges are a Nobel Prize winning concept. There's a whole book and lots there. Speaking of books, this is mine, what we were talking about here today, what your customer wants and can't tell you. And it is set up with a lot of what we talked about today, 16 concepts, the full recipes, how your brain works. And it has, it's very much set up to be able to actually apply the information instead of just reading a book and thinking, well, that was great. And then you're off on your way. All of part 4, which is pretty short, but it's called Don't Get Stuck. And it's all about those brain biases that keep it. So, you watch a presentation and you think, that's amazing. I want to go implement this on Monday when I get back to work. And then you get lost in the rigmarole and forget everything. So that part 4 helps you understand those brain biases so you can overcome it. So thank you again. I want to open to questions. So I'm going to stop the sharing on this, but because of the way that I show up here, you can still see the slide in my video, at least for now. And then hopefully we can have Hannibal come back or and then for whatever questions, I think I saw that there was a hand raised.
Yeah, Melina, I'll be able to come back on video shortly. I think you might have to click one button or two.
Fun. Okay, let's see. I'll work on that.
But no worries. I did spend a little bit of time volunteering on radio too. So I'm perfectly able to facilitate a question without it. So, well, first, I want to thank you for just an incredible presentation that I think everyone here learned a lot from today. So, again, we'll open the floor for questions, whatever's on your mind. And if there's not something in chat, I also have a few questions I think people might be interested in learning more about. Okay, well, I guess I can ask the first question here. There's a part in the book where you talk about delighting customers, and then also talked about being able to keep things simple. Do you have any thoughts on how to decide between when you want to delight consumers and when you want to keep things simple?
Yeah, so I would say in general, being able to delight, and there's a full chapter, like you said, on surprise and delight in the book, and also on the peak end rule, which go hand in hand. And so the main thing to know about delight is when you're looking at increasing loyalty, we often look at satisfaction scores. So people will say, were you satisfied with this on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer, things like that. And then we say, oh, look, amazing, we got all 10s or 9 out of 10 or whatnot. There's a whole other avenue of, when people ask for 10s, that's not really helpful in the behavior you're actually trying to shift. But when you think about the difference between delight and satisfaction is this question of expectations. And so when you have an expectation, you can only ever be satisfied. And there's no extreme satisfaction that makes you want to go to, Twitter and talk about how amazing an experience was. Whereas when you are delighted is when something unexpected and positive happens. And we have this benefit of increased dopamine in the brain, which is tied with anticipation. And when you can have that coming in, this also gets to some of those lotteries or chances to win. The unexpected is necessary to be able to delight. And what's good there is it means you don't have to give everyone everything, but you want to have those unexpected moments of joy that will make people want to share and talk about you. And they have been shown to be much more loyal in that way
Perfect.
as well.
And we have a couple more questions in the. I don't know if you can see the Q and
Yep.
A
Yep.
here. Yeah, there's some two great ones here.
Yeah, so I see a question here from Jenna that says, curious to hear your perspective on how ethics plays into this. Valuable to make business decisions based on the way the brain works, but is it fair to customers? I could see how some people would perceive this type of approach as manipulative. And there is a section within the book where I talk about ethics for sure. And I always get this question. So the first thing that is important to note, and that I always say here, is with any knowledge, someone can use it for ill, and hopefully the majority of others will use it for good. And so in the way that I share information on the podcast, in the book, in my consulting, everything is always with this, use your skills for good and not for evil in the best way that I can help to promote that. The thing to note is whether you think about these things in advance or not, you are influencing the decision that someone is going to make. So with that nudges series, the other thing we talk about in nudging is something, choice architecture and the way that you present the decision. So if you don't think about the choices and think, I don't want to be involved in this, and so I'm not going to influence and let that all just sort of happen. You still are a choice architect, whether you think about it or not, and you may inadvertently be pushing people toward a worse option if you don't take the time to think about what is best for them and present in that way. So even something as simple as if you include a default can have a huge impact. The order that names are in, if you have, say for, voting for people, if they're listed with incumbents in a certain order, if you do seniority order versus alphabetical or reverse alphabetical, will impact the choices that people make. And if you don't think about it, you're influencing their decisions anyway. So in my opinion, and those of many behavioral economists, it's best to think about it, be thoughtful about those things so that you can help nudge in the right direction. So that the other thing is, when we look at behavioral economics, behavioral science, we work in the space of nudges to where everyone can still have free choice. There's no force into anything. When you get into regulations and force, that is outside of the field, but the choices always still exist, and someone could make a different decision if it is more appealing to them at any time. So this was from an anonymous attendee, says, how do you balance helping people make decisions with making sure they're making the right decisions for themselves? For instance, some friction could be good versus buy now so people don't overspend. So yes, this is, as we look at context, as I talked about, is knowing what your responsibility is within the space that you're working in. And, even for some soda manufacturers now that are trying to make it so that people are not only drinking soda because of the health impacts and obesity and things like that. And so if you are looking for that social responsibility side at the business and deciding what you're wanting to do, it really is in the benefits of what makes sense in the particular project that you're working on and the space, that friction in many cases, yes, you do want to add it, cool down periods when people are filing for divorce being an example, and how many people change their mind when they have that 30 or 90 day cool down. And so if you have are you sure, sometimes you want to have that in there to make sure people really want it so they don't have returns, or maybe you just have a really good return policy, which actually makes it easier for people to buy as well. So knowing what you're trying to accomplish, the industry that you're in, what your business is about, the importance of your customers, all would come into play in making those choices, each time as you go. So we have another question from, I apologize if I pronounce this wrong, Sanaya, which says, as the field of behavioral economics grows and this literature becomes more accessible, do you see people becoming more aware of their biases and mindful of their buying behavior? So in many ways, yes. And there are a few spaces where there's an awareness that is having, where some tactics are known, I guess. But in general, these are based on how we've evolved as a species over many, 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 many thousands of years. And we can't change them, or that immediate gut reaction. Similar, so when we think back to the ground beef, they're the same. And if you say logically, well, I know they're the same, so I'm not gonna be impacted by that. Even just to have the moment to think about it and realize it still impacted you. You can't stop your brain from having that immediate reaction with the subconscious, even if your conscious comes into play. And so with things like social proof and deciding what restaurant we're going to eat at, following the herd for things like cryptocurrencies and all sorts of choices that we make, when there are 11 million bits being processed every single second, it will take a very, 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 very long time, past any of our lifetimes, before those sorts of evolutionary behaviors are adjusted and adapted, to be making it so these wouldn't be effective. One thing to note is that while all humans we demonstrate each of these concepts in various applications, and these have been shown across gender and age and location and types of background and everything. So all humans are loss averse and react to social proof and have an impact from anchoring and like to have context when making decisions and can be primed. But it doesn't mean it's exactly the same in every single situation. So I might have loss aversion in an area that someone else wouldn't, or react to scarcity in this item versus that item. So that's why, again, context matters and how the information is presented and why you want to test and see what's going to work in your specific example of, that advertisement you're going to run or whatever that happens to be.
Well, Melina, I think we've reached the end of our time, but I want to thank. Oh, great, the video's working. Cool. Well, I want to thank everyone for making the time to be part of this. I think this is a really special session, and hopefully you learned a lot. And as Melina has explained in her book, there's a lot more to learn. So I want to thank everyone for attending. This recording will be available, and we'll have it emailed out and shared with everybody who is here today, so that you can continue to learn from it. So I want to thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great and thoughtful rest of their day.
I think there were some questions that came up too in the midst. And if you think of things after the fact, please do feel free to email me. I tried to put this into the whole thing, but it looked like it just went to you, Hannibal. But my email is melina@thebrainybusiness.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Hopefully that can be included with the slides for people to reach out and connect. Happy to answer questions and be in contact. So thank you all.
Perfect. Well, have a good one, everyone.